Good afternoon, everyone out there in YouTube land. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we are coming to you from beautiful downtown San Francisco, although it's kind of gray and cold outside, so maybe not beautiful. As always, my name is Yuri Grinshteyn. I am your host for today. I'm joined by my friends, Anthony and Joe.
Hey everyone, my name is Anthony Bushong, and I'm a customer engineer here at Google.
Awesome.
I'm Joe Cardenas. I'm a customer engineer as well, working with SaaS companies here.
Awesome. Thank you both for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, of course. It's fun to be here.
Yeah, I am really excited about today's topic. I think that this is something that a lot of people are interested in. We're going to be talking about a brand new technology that I think a lot of people don't really know very much about. And when I say a lot of people, I'm absolutely speaking for myself. Thank you for being here. So let's talk about Istio, right? We've been talking a lot about Kubernetes, right? Excellent way to run your containers, gain orchestration, gain a ton of benefits.
Sure.
What's Istio going to add to people that are running Kubernetes?
Yeah, I think that's some of the content we have prepared today. I think we have a little story to tell that leads us up to understanding how Istio provides that value, or what it is and how it does it. But I think if we can just jump into the little story is we like to talk about just what the world looked like before all of this, right? And so I think we'll have a lot of viewers who watch this who are well familiar of the paradigm of deploying monolithic applications. Typically, this means that everything is single process, and we have several modules, but ultimately they all get deployed together. It kind of falls in line with this whole waterfall deployment. And so there's been a recent shift, maybe in the past decade. Yeah. And there's been a lot of separate attempts, but really we've arrived at this way of decomposing that monolith into microservices, right? And so I think that starts with the advent of kind of making containers and the technology underneath it accessible via Docker. And then ultimately people started to say, okay, well, we're able to get some more rapid development. We're able to kind of work with these modules, now treat them like separate services, and they'll just interact with each other via remote calls. But ultimately, we have a ton of these services now. What once was like one application with separate modules, now we have a bunch of different services.
Yeah, so this is actually something that I have lots of customers talk to me about, right? I think a lot of folks have now made the shift to kind of this microservices deployment model, the architecture model, really. And now they're starting to ask questions like, all right, so I've got all these services all over the place. How do I either get them to talk to each other, prevent them from talking to each other if need be, prevent people from outside my deployment from talking to some services, but allow them to talk to others? And then how do I understand what all is going on within that sort of mass of microservices?
Yeah, I think that's one of the natural things that you see. It's, people move away from monoliths, move into the microservices architecture, start using Kubernetes, solve problems using Kubernetes, get agility, but then they start getting to this networking side, and they're like, here's a new problem I have, and how do I solve that? And I think Istio gives you an opportunity to start to fill some of those gaps, and that's kind of what we're going to detail today.
Awesome. All right, let's get into it.
Cool. So here's just a fun little picture that I like to post. Here's the little title slide, and this is our agenda. So we're going to tell a little story, talk about what value Kubernetes adds to that kind of architecture that we're talking about, but we'll start to see that, okay, Kubernetes solves some problems for us. What problems doesn't it solve? And then that will really kind of answer your base question of what's Istio all about. So,
fantastic.
I just like this picture just to describe kind of the shift into microservices.
I want to know what they were shipping in that giant.
Yeah, that looks like a fort.
Oh yeah, it's and we're talking literal containers is people get it. So what does Kubernetes give us in this kind of container architecture, right? And so the basic flow of Kubernetes for I think today we're really going to try and this is the ideal audience is for people who are familiar with Kubernetes, maybe using it, and then really don't know too much about Istio. So at a high level, this is the basic workflow of Kubernetes, right? We have our containers now that we've, that run our little decoupled services. And ultimately, like you said, anyone who is deploying at scale finds it, a whole bunch of challenges arising, right? So the first is how do we get that onto infrastructure in a declarative, reliable way where we're not having to imperatively write, let's say, like Chef and kind of baking our application into that. It seems a little bit counterintuitive to the problems we're trying to solve. So that's really where Kubernetes is helpful in the sense that we're able to declare exactly what we're going to be running. We hand that to the Kubernetes control plane, and then voila, it's running somewhere in your Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
There are levers that certainly allow you to kind of tweak where they get deployed, but for the most part, the flow is simple. We're able to declare our desired state of our application, and everything is just done. That includes load balancers, that includes service discovery to communicate with other services, right? That's really the advantage that Kubernetes gives us.
So before you go on, I actually think you made a really interesting point there, right? So talking about kind of the difference between declarative and imperative programming, I'll say, right? So Kubernetes, the idea is you say, like, here's the state of the world as I think it should be, or as I want it to be. Kubernetes figures out what are the steps that are necessary in order to make that happen. Whereas you contrast it with something like Puppet or Chef, which I'm pretty familiar with. You have to write, and in Chef's terms, the words they literally use is a recipe. You have to tell it, do these steps, right? And then at the end of those steps, you hope that the outcome is kind of what you had intended or what you envisioned. And Kubernetes just takes care of all that for you, right? You literally just get to the end and say, make it so. And it figures out how to do it. And I think that's sort of like a difference in paradigm that I think is really important for people to understand as they're working with Kubernetes, even before they get to some of these advanced things like Istio.
Yeah, I think an easy way to think about it is a desired state. Where do you want to be? And you basically tell Kubernetes proxy, hey, I want this many replica sets, I want this many pods, and this is the service I'm deploying. And then it goes out and does that for you, which is great. It's different than the old model of like, hey, I'm imperatively going to make that world. Now you just say, here's my YAML, make it for me.
And you definitely don't want me writing any recipes.
Exactly.
Both for feed and for Chef. So.
All right, so we can, obviously all of us are fans of Kubernetes. Let's get back to the topic at hand. Kubernetes is great, solves a lot of problems. So let's talk about how Istio fits into it.
Cool, yeah. So I mean, this is kind of an application that we're going to be looking at today, just for the sake of showing Kubernetes and Istio together. So this is the actual application, and you can actually find this in the Istio samples repo. Right.
Did you pull up a comedy of errors intentionally?
Yeah.
Is that what we should be looking forward to?
It was my out. It was my out in case the demos don't work. But Kubernetes gives us something, right? We have these different services here. They're polyglot. They're in different languages. We're able to declaratively say, hey, I just want some replicas of a product container or pods. I want some reviews, some ratings, some details. Here, Kubernetes, go and run this over n amount of nodes. And Kubernetes will just go and do it. And so Kubernetes will give us a bunch of other things, like being able to organize these so that we're able to access them via load balancer or something like that. But ultimately, the benefits of Kubernetes come down to this, right? We're able to scale our team and software because we have decomposed not only the software itself, but how the teams develop it. It gives us velocity for deploying that in the sense that we're not really concerned about deploying infrastructure alongside or baking it together. Efficiency in the sense that these pods are kind of bin packed onto a certain set of nodes. And abstraction over infrastructure, right? We don't care about the machines that these containers are running on. But ultimately, that leads to some other problems that you didn't have when you're running monolithic applications, right? We were able to trust traffic between modules because they're running in the same application, but now we're using remote procedure calls. Right, and we're interacting them via maybe HTTP or something like that. So it changes how we view traffic between services. It changes, observability. Right, Kubernetes gives you a lot of like the declarative state of I want my application running. But what if I want to understand traffic between two of my different respective services? Right, it doesn't really provide that. It's focused on running your applications, but at production, at production level. Applications, we need to have this as well.
Yeah, I think with that, with traffic control, what if I want to release version 2 and I want 50% to go to version 2 and 50% to go to version 1? Kubernetes will not do that. Another thing of observability, what if I want all this telemetry to be on a dashboard that all my team can see and see network errors? Can't really do that. And then secure communication. There's no TLS, there's no kind of certificate support straight out of the box over Kubernetes. So that's where Istio comes into play.
Fantastic. All right. So sounds like we've identified some issues with Kubernetes. We know that we want to be able to secure the communication both into the deployment as well as like between our services. We want to understand what all is going on. And then we want to be able to control how traffic flows again into the deployment and then kind of within the services in our deployment. All right, let's bring in Istio
and so
show me how you're going to solve all this.
This is where Istio comes into play, right? I mean, Kubernetes really gives us this kind of way of operating, if we're talking about the OSI model, operating at like L3. And sure, there's ways to operate at L7 with ingress, but really that's not going to give you some of the stuff that we talked about. So that's where Istio really comes into play. It brings us up to the application layer where we can understand and understand the traffic going between our microservices. We're able to dive deep into the packets where Kubernetes just really won't give you that. So what Istio looks like, how does it do all this magic? Before I go into that, this is just like the basic definition you probably find on the open source documentation. I added in something there just because it helps me. It's really a platform to connect, monitor, and manage and secure microservices, where Kubernetes is focused on just running them. Right, so it's a layer above Kubernetes that gives us a lot of these capabilities that we just didn't have prior. So this is the actual architecture. Let's walk through, just like at a very high level, we have two concepts that we need to kind of grok here. We have a control plane, and so I'll talk about each of these individual components in a second, but I think really we'll start at the data plane. And so the data plane, and these are common terms thrown around with the whole idea of a service mesh. Service mesh being the ability to kind of give us all of this stuff about different services that are interacting, right? So the first key component of Istio is the Envoy proxy, which comprises the data plane. And so what that means is that we actually have traffic intercepted from our actual containers by this Envoy proxy, and it's deployed alongside every single kind of workload that you're running in, let's say, your Kubernetes cluster. The cool part is that actually the Envoy proxy can also be deployed with workloads outside of Kubernetes, right? So that's some of the stuff that we won't be covering today, but know that it's not something meant only for Kubernetes, but rather a bunch of services. Some could be in Kubernetes, some can be a Docker. Either way, all of them use this kind of Envoy proxy to intercept traffic and do some of the stuff we're talking about.
So that's a really interesting point you just made, right? Istio is not just for Kubernetes deployments, right? Kubernetes kind of enables and then creates a lot of the need for Istio, right? Because it's a very common way to deploy microservices. It gives you all that container orchestration, but then because you're doing it in Kubernetes, because your infrastructure is abstracted, and because you can run lots of services on one cluster, then you need things like traffic splitting. You need to understand what's going on. You need to secure that communication. But you just said something interesting, which is you don't need to be running Kubernetes to use Istio, right? So even if you're just running Docker in a more traditional format or more traditional approach, and I say traditional, even though I think in 2018 Kubernetes is the traditional way of doing it. But let's say you're not using Kubernetes and you're just running Docker containers. Istio still, you can use it, and maybe even you should use it to kind of gain a lot of the same benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Istio is, again, I think the community is talking about Kubernetes first, but really, again, expanding out to kind of these hybrid workloads that are realistic when you're decomposing a monolith, and everything goes directly into Kubernetes. So.
Awesome. All right.
So that's the data plane, Envoy. We have that, and that needs something to call home to, right? To do some intelligent things that we'd like to configure to achieve those benefits outlined. So Pilot is the first one. So Pilot is actually part of the control plane that will interact with Kubernetes, and so it's able to understand the different endpoints that are being created as we deploy applications into Kubernetes. We also have Mixer. So Mixer is interesting in the sense that the proxies will be able to communicate with Mixer to report back attributes that gives us the telemetry we're looking for, the observability we're looking for, and then also integrates with a ton of adapters. Some are default outside of the box or out of the box, like I think Prometheus, but it's really able to, again, you're able to create these policies where we're now able to kind of manage traffic between our workloads, and Mixer provides that for us.
So Mixer is going to both collect the telemetry from our containers or our pods in Kubernetes, but also be the thing that sort of gives us observability and also control the traffic.
Absolutely, yeah. It's Mixer's what understands kind of these attributes as far as like the traffic that's being sent between two workloads, and so that gives us both the telemetry and then the ability to say, hey, actually we have this policy or this quota that we want to enforce.
Cool. Yeah, it enforces policies and also does access control. So that's primarily Mixer's kind of the brains.
Got it. All right, cool.
And yeah,
tell me about Istio Auth.
Istio Auth. This is the cool part around secure communication, where Kubernetes will give you the ability to, let's say, create some of these firewalls around around two of our workloads, but it won't really give us the ability to enable mutual TLS by default. Right? Imagine what we're trying to have to do now without Istio. We're trying to have to bake that into both of our workloads that are communicating, and that becomes challenging. Think about all of the different challenges that may arise from SSL libraries. It becomes complex. Istio auth is something where it will, if you configure it with mutual TLS, will take care of that for you. Will propagate the actual certs to the Envoy sidecards and also rotate those certificates. So a lot of stuff that just comes out of the box.
And this is actually an important point, because if you read anything about how we architect applications here at Google, it's all about you don't trust anything. Yep. Everything is mutually TLS authenticated, right? And Istio is basically a way by which folks, both on GCP but also like in other Kubernetes deployments or even in other containerized deployments, can apply the same kind of best practices based on what we've learned here about how to build and deploy secure applications by using Istio.
Yeah, I think it's called defense in depth.
There you go.
It's like principal least privilege also. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a ton of goodness that really manifests in Istio. They're really around for a while. It's
cool.
So that same application that I showed you earlier with Istio integrated, and so we'll
and I'm sorry for those of us who are Kubernetes Padawans rather than Jedi Knights.
Jedi Knights. We had a very colorful discussion, but we'll sidestep that today about Jedi rankings.
Give us like a 2-second definition of a sidecar.
Yeah, so I mean, this is something where if I'm deploying my pod, that's the atomic unit of Kubernetes, right? This could be one or a few containers. A sidecar is something that gets deployed alongside of that. So it shares the same fate as the workloads that you're running, and honestly, we need to have it side by side, all of our pods, because it's intercepting traffic, right? And so it's something where they're deployed together, and that's actually one thing, and I'll talk to it a little bit more later. But there are actually ways to automatically inject your workloads with this Envoy sidecar, right? And that's using a Kubernetes feature called an initializer that will look at the workload you're trying to create and say, hey, we're using Istio, so we're going to put in an Envoy sidecar there.
Awesome.
And we'll do that automatically. So, I think that for me, I had a little bit of new user syndrome, and I'm still learning Istio, and it was like, oh man, is this really complicated to kind of, if we look at this architecture, to achieve this, to deploy all of this? But hopefully some of the workflows I'm about to demonstrate will show that it's not too difficult.
All right, so speaking of demonstrating, I think I imagine folks are pretty anxious to see this at work. So
yep, I do have a few last slides here, so we'll shoot through life of the request. So we're configuring, we're creating rules, and we're deploying our services. Our proxies get injected, and so once all of that is set up, we'll see traffic go from one, goes through the proxy. The proxy is able to, because of pilot, know where to reach service B, or this backend, and then that'll be via various methods, with or without mutual TLS. The server side, or the backend proxy, service B, will reach back out to Mixer, say, hey, here's, are there any quotas or anything that I'm up against, and then we'll actually route that traffic to the containers. And so that's really the basic flow that we were describing, and how those components are used. So what Istio gives us, and this is what leads us to the demos, is first is traffic control. And so, so let's move into a little bit of a cheat sheet that I have. So actually, the first thing that we're going to do, and would it be helpful, do you think, Yuri, to actually show the initializer in action, or is the point kind of there?
Yeah, I think we should kind of skip to...
Sure, looking at the route rules.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's start with this initial route rule that will just, so if you looked at the kind of architecture that I had various versions of reviews, and so each of those represent a service and a deployment and set of deployments in Kubernetes, right? And so what we're actually going to do is make sure that for the reviews, we're actually going to, for all of the services that we have running, we're going to use version 1 only, and route traffic to version 1 only. Okay. So if we look at the application here, so if I continuously refresh that, we'll see that the book reviews is changing, right? Sometimes there are stars, sometimes there are black stars, sometimes there are red stars, right? And this is because we have 3 different versions. And if we don't say anything, we just give this to Kubernetes, we're going to be randomly kind of routed to different versions of our little review thing that is giving us either no stars or versions 2 and 3, which either give us black or red stars.
Okay, so without Istio, Kubernetes would basically do it randomly.
Yeah, we're just getting kind of a
round robin, or
yeah.
Basically, we don't really know.
We're getting
Somehow,
a relatively even distribution across all of this. So, what I'm going to do now is we're going to apply the first route rule that will change everything to version 1. And so version 1, in the case of reviews, actually has no stars. So,
and while you're doing that, I think I want to point out here is that you were using the YAML syntax, which if you've been on Kubernetes, should be fairly familiar. So Istio kind of takes that command paradigm or approach to like telling it what to do and carries it forward. So again, if you're familiar with Kubernetes, working with Istio should be pretty easy. You don't have to learn a new programming language. You don't have to learn a new configuration syntax.
I think that's one point that you made earlier that is really true. When I first started messing around with Istio, I was kind of worried. I'm like, I'm going to have to learn a whole new language, something different. But it's integrated with the YAMLs that you're already using with Kubernetes. So it's basically a new service offering inside of Kubernetes, which is nice.
Yeah, that makes
more
life a lot
control.
easier. All right, so now we've defined our routing rule. Tell us what you're about to do.
So I'm actually going to, so we see this, I have 3 little demos for how we're going to control traffic today. The first is called route rule all v1. And so that's, again, just doing what we're showing you here. And one thing that's cool is I can actually use kubectl here, which is the Kubernetes command line tool, to actually create that.
So even better now, not only are you using the same syntax to tell it what to do with YAML files, but you're actually using the same tooling. So there's not a separate like Istio command line. There's no Istio CTL.
So there is an Istio CTL.
There is, okay.
I like to use kubectl just because it's what I'm familiar with. The way, and for those who are well familiar with Kubernetes, there's a concept of a custom resource. And so these route rules are just ways to they're custom resources in Kubernetes, which again, one of the value adds of Kubernetes is that we can extend the Kubernetes API by creating these custom resources. So Istio is just taking advantage of that, which is why I can do this nice little kubectl apply. But there is Istio CTL as, if you're trying to run Istio in Docker containers without Kubernetes or just bare VMs, there's ways to interact with that where you're not just limited to Kubernetes.
Okay, cool.
So I created that. Assuming the demo gods are on my side today, we go to the actual product page here, and we should see no stars every time I refresh this page because now we're only using version 1 of our review service.
All right, let's refresh and see what happens.
Look at that.
It worked.
And just a couple more refreshes for good measure. And so we see, we're able to, and for those who are, sliding through all this, for those who are like not too familiar with Kubernetes, maybe it's not too spectacular, but what's amazing is that we're able to do this without integrating this with our application code, right? We're not trying to do some of this, on the application side. We can actually do this declaratively through a simple resource definition in YAML.
Yeah, very cool.
It's pretty cool stuff.
And you're still using the same tooling, right? You're using kubectl, you're using YAML. So now you're gaining all this additional power, all this control, all this flexibility. Yeah. But you don't really have to do things differently.
Right. Yeah, so this is just some basic traffic control that I was showing. What now I'm going to show is some content-based traffic steering. We're actually going to go into the headers.
Tell me what content-based traffic steering actually means.
Yeah, so I think that this really, there are multiple ways that you can kind of interpret this. One is we can take a specific subset of users. Maybe I'm running a SaaS application and I want to do a wildcard for anyone with the @google.com. I want to show them a specific version. Right? We're able to achieve that because we understand the, Envoy is able to look at and understand the headers in our requests. So I'm actually going to do something kind of cool.
So you're going to show them different, again, you're using the same paradigm of versions,
yes,
but now you're going to steer people to different version based on things in the HTTP headers.
Exactly
and
that.
You're going to use location or the domain they're coming from.
Precisely. So I'm going to change the user now.
You're signing as me. How did you get my password?
I'm signing in as you.
The password is blank.
Your password was way too easy, Yuri.
I'm sorry. I think Anthony fished me.
So here's the thing. I like, let's say I like Yuri, right? And I want to show him actually version 2. Okay. Because I think that, he'll have some good insight.
Thanks for that trust.
And so what we're actually able to do is, diving back into, let's look at this new route rule that will, while I have this first rule, that says, hey, we're going to route everyone to the first version of reviews. I actually think that Yuri, so I've kind of defined this in a regex here.
I'm seeing something I'm very familiar with, and
oh, your name. That's good to know.
I was going to say regular expressions.
Oh, there you go. So, and we're actually going to route you specific to version 2. One of the things that's pretty cool is I have the existing rule in place, but I actually gave this a higher priority. So this is precedence 2. So this is just a field that I can define that will actually take this the rule over the first rule that we created.
Yeah,
so
and if folks have used firewall rules in GCP, they should be familiar with the concept of priorities.
Exactly.
And I can see that here, even without being any kind of an expert, you're looking at headers, you're specifically pulling out the cookie, and you're just doing a basic regular expression to get the user value.
Yeah, a good use case for this could be maybe you have like a pool of beta users. You want to show them a beta page that you've changed, the content is completely different, only they see it, and you're doing that within Istio rather than anything else.
Yeah, very cool.
So
right.
let's refresh
see if it
this.
works.
Let's see if you got version 2. There we go.
Nice.
See, so if I keep refreshing this now, we're going to see that,
So
again,
as long as I'm signed in, so all right.
So
Let's sign out and see what happens, right? We know that as long as I'm signed in. All right, so now refresh.
Signed out, and we see that we're already back to just
Yeah, you're getting all kinds of stuff now.
version 1.
Very
So
cool.
It's
Very
again,
cool.
and user is just a very simple example of this.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to roll out a specific version to iPhone users as opposed to someone coming from a browser or coming from Android. Like it really gets powerful in a way that just wasn't possible before Istio in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So sorry, I keep switching around here. The last rule I want to show as far as traffic control, and this really is apparent as far as what Kubernetes is able to offer, is being able to do kind of a canary deployment, right? And so the canary deployment, that's the concept of we want to slowly shift the percentage of traffic to a new version, right? And so, actually, let me just delete these other two first.
And again, you're using kubectl to basically just take the stuff that you've already created, use the same YAML files, just tell it to delete them.
Yep. So, so what Kubernetes wasn't able to do is to declaratively say, we want to route X amount of traffic to version 1, and then in this case, X amount of traffic to version 3, right? Typically, we're having to create like 2 deployments and then of different sizes and then changing the sizes to kind of get that actual spread across those, version 1 and version 3. But in Istio, we're actually able to do this declaratively, which is so awesome.
So once he does this, it's actually Pilot that's doing this. Pilot handles the intelligent routing, so as he's going to apply this YAML, this tells Pilot, hey, I want to change this to a canary deployment to 50-50, AB, whatever it may be. I think you're doing 50-50, correct?
Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
so we see here in our, we're just waiting version 1 and waiting version 3. So now, let's go back to our application. If I refresh through this, we'll see that this is version 3 and this is version 1. If I do it, we see that it's about 50%.
Yeah, basically every other one gets the different version.
Yeah. So that's traffic control. There's some other cool things that, again, is for a more advanced session like fault injection. That's just the ability to, throw in some latency and see how your applications react. Throw some jitter as far as the, QPS. And then circuit breaking is some passive health checking. Again, this is for, there's really a lot of features that come under kind of traffic management that Istio gives you. I just wanted to show a couple simple ones that are really, at least for me, very easy to understand.
Yeah. All right, so before we go on, Joe, I think you're maybe monitoring the live chat on YouTube.
Yeah.
Do you have any questions that we think we should have Anthony answer?
Let's see.
Looks like there's a healthy dose of activity.
There are tons. Space. Here we go.
Yep.
I have a question around Istio Vision with regards to API management capabilities. The space that traditionally API gateways proxies filled and now clearly overlaps with data plane sidecar proxies.
Istio Vision with regard to API management capabilities.
Yeah,
so I think
go ahead.
Yeah, that might be something we need to cover in the comments, just because I'm not sure which features specifically from API management, right? I think that certainly you'll see certain kind of, if you have a gateway, this is kind of like a central perspective where you can implement things like rate limiting, you can do kind of monetization of your APIs.
Yeah.
Istio doesn't give you all of that, and I think that one thing that's interesting for that I think Istio is specific to is that it's really it gives us a lot more than just traffic management, right?
Yeah.
That gateway is focused on kind of exposing a set of APIs and having that central like tool that will kind of give us some of the features that Istio gives us, but there's a lot more. And again, Istio is looking not so much to serve APIs to, kind of the public. Rather, it's trying to get us to better understand and better control traffic between our services and our applications.
Yeah,
it's a slightly different use cases, though I do see the point of some overlaps as far as features.
Yeah, it makes sense, right? So if you're looking to like productize an API or build out a developer ecosystem, then you might need to use something like Apigee.
Yeah.
To really have like that fully featured API and developer experience.
Sure.
Whereas if you're more focused on how do I kind of control and secure my microservices deployment and have all these services talk to each other,
right.
Ensure mutual TLS, then Istio is really the right tool for the job. Exactly. And I would say that very often the answer might be both. All right,
That's
cool.
a good point.
Any other good questions we should take, Joe?
There's one other. How does Istio work with protocols applications that gossip their bound IP to peers' clients instead of a service address? Examples being Kafka or Cassandra.
Yeah, that is a good question. And maybe would you ever want to deploy something like Cassandra in this context? I mean, the way I would envision it working would be you'd have your application logic deployed in Kubernetes. And then basically sort of
reach out to these backend
reach
services.
out to Cassandra as a backend, and Kafka is a whole separate thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, from my opinion, or from my perspective, I think state in Kubernetes is still tricky. I know there's stateful sets.
I was about to say stateful sets could, but still, I wouldn't deploy Cassandra with stateful set.
Yeah, I know there's a stateful set for Cassandra, and some people are doing that for the portability. But in my mind, from my perspective, I would, for most use cases, recommend actually reaching out to keeping your data kind of backing services separate, so that it adds a lot of complexity and it's still unclear as far as all the value for, let's say, integrating stateful sets into your service mesh.
All right.
So
Makes sense. So let's do this. We've covered traffic splitting and some routing in Istio.
Yep.
What else does it do?
So observability. I think this is something that, again, is one of the primary value adds. I do not have a specific demo for this other than to really just show some of the things that come out of the box and some of the integrations that we already have. But I think it's still a developing story, right? Istio is only in .5. I think .6 is coming shortly. And 1.0 is probably sometime next quarter, right? So it's something where a lot of these adapters that Mixer, if you remember, is collecting these attributes from Envoy and is able to kind of parse them into different backends, right? That could be Zipkin for tracing, it could be Prometheus and Grafana, it could be Stackdriver, right? It's and it even gives you the ability to write these custom adapters if you want to parse those attributes in your own way, right? But the thing that's important here to note is that we're getting fleet-wide telemetry without really having to do anything, right? We're not having to bake this into our application code where we're writing out logs and that leads to drift across your different services as far as how we collect this telemetry. It's because we have this proxy that is deployed alongside everything that we're really able to, again, get that fleet-wide observability.
So today a lot of folks are using like a logging API to get data into Stackdriver logging.
Exactly.
They may be even using the monitoring API to generate metric data, and then they're using Trace or maybe either directly or from Zipkin to get traces created.
Exactly.
If Istio can do all that for us,
that's
a lot of work saved.
It is. It really is, and I think that's really probably my favorite value add that Istio brings to the table. So I'm just showing here a couple of the integrations with Mixer. We're able to get this information. I have like kind of a while loop that's storing some traffic.
So what is it that we're looking at? Is this an Istio dashboard or is this something else?
Yes, so this is a Grafana dashboard.
Grafana, okay.
And so we're actually looking at some of the telemetry that Envoy is already reporting. And so one of the coolest things that I think we're able to see is we're actually looking, so here's the review service that I was showing, and we actually see the traffic, because I have that rule in place, it's really being distributed between version 1 and version 3. And we see the 200 responses here, and we see that there's a healthy mix, we can, between version 1 and version 3 because I defined that weighting rule, right? And so, we're seeing about 50% of the traffic going to version 1 and 50% going to version 3. And so we really get some, built-in telemetry, observability without having to, again, bake this into our application. It'd be very difficult, especially thinking of the polyglot kind of services that we had. We don't even have to think about how we incorporate that into our application. It's just given to us. So,
very cool.
A couple other examples. We have like a kind of little service graph that will show you the different versions of reviews there, and we're looking at kind of some of the requests per second. So again, multiple different adapters that you can build in.
So actually go back to that, because I think this is something that, even though this is a very simplistic visualization, the information that it's presenting is tremendously valuable.
Oh, yeah,
right?
absolutely.
To have this sort of single screen representation of your entire microservice architecture, to see how traffic is flowing, to see kind of what the volume of traffic is that's flowing between all these different services,
Exactly.
to see like the versions of each service that are deployed all in just one screen. Yeah, maybe not the prettiest dashboard I've ever seen, but man, that is a lot of really powerful information that people spend a lot of time building stuff to just represent this.
Sure, and you can build your own, right? Again, I think Mixer is really being advertised, and rightfully so, as the main point of integration with Istio.
Very extensible.
Yep, so we're seeing here, pretty close to 50% between version 1 and version 3, because that's the rule that I had in place. So we have version 3 getting about a little over 1 request per second, and reviews coming pretty close to that as well.
Very cool.
And so, again, there's multiple different backends. I think I briefly showed Zipkin. So now we can get trace information. I think it also integrates with Jaeger, but I can actually kind of look at, let's say, product page, and then kind of dive into the trace and look at some spans between what calls are actually happening. It just kind of reminds me of just like looking at my Google Chrome console and looking at the waterfall kind of a trace span, and we really get that now by default, again, out of the box between our different services.
Yeah, this is amazing. Cool this stuff. Is something that people really have not that they have a hard time with it, but trying to do this with like Stackdriver Trace, for example, without Istio, to get this information collected in a microservices deployment, that's a non-trivial exercise, right? You're using the Trace API, you're sort of building a trace, and then you're putting all these spans in it. It's a lot of work on like the software development team to build that instrumentation. Istio just does that for you.
That's again my favorite part of Istio is really this observability that we're looking at.
Very cool.
So last is secure communication policy enforcement. I don't really have a demo for this, but more would just want to speak to it as it was the third kind of pillar that I kind of framed everything around. Really want to hit home that in the same way that we kind of get this auto traffic control and auto observability, we get auto mutual TLS. So again, this is something where we actually have Istio auth propagate the certificates to our Envoy sidecars, and then that'll mount it as a volume. And we get that in a very secure way, and it'll actually rotate those certificates for you. So again, one less thing that, again, you have to think about at scale of operating dozens, if not hundreds of services. There is access control, as Joe mentioned before, as well as quota enforcement. So one of those quotas could be rate limiting. I could say that this version should only get one request per second, and anything faster than that, it will actually deny that service from accessing, let's say, the backend. Right. So a lot of really I can create these policies around my services, how they should be accessed, and then also secure that communication. Really tracing back to what I mentioned before is like Kubernetes will, there's something like network policies, right, where we can define what pods can and can't talk to each other, but that's really not doing any deep packet inspection, right? It's just implemented really at the L3 or L4 level, and so with Istio, we can now create some of these policies based on information in our HTTP packets, right? So some pretty cool stuff.
Awesome.
So I think we'll have some time for questions. I just want to quickly recap. There's a control plane, there's a data plane, there's all this stuff that may look complicated. I know for me, I had new user syndrome. I'm just like, this is really complex, but at the end of the day, this is what we really want to focus on with Istio, right? It's just our applications. We're deploying something automatically or manually alongside it, and we really get all of this out of the box because we did that. So while, I expect people will kind of dive in and into the nuances of it, this is really the workflow where I really want to have people focus. So there's just a few things that really helped me learn it, as well as this actual book info application. You can run through and create some of these traffic management rules, or look at the kind of Grafana dashboards and things like that. But I guess, do we have some time for questions, Yuri? Or
yeah, why don't we take a couple more questions from our audience,
Joe? We got in here. Roadmap questions, so I don't think we can answer that one.
Yeah, probably not easily.
And if there are any, I can look at the chat. We can kind of answer some of those in the comments.
There's a question here. I'm new to Kubernetes and Istio. Which resources does one recommend for getting up to speed? I think you have some here.
We got some Istio resources here. Where should they go to get started with Kubernetes, other than Kubernetes.io?
If you're kind of just looking to understand the kind of primitives of Kubernetes, you could go to, I think it's called PWK, called Play with Kubernetes, and goes through kind of some of the core objects as well as some of the abstractions above, like the pod. I think that's a good kind of starter. And then from there, maybe diving into the book info sample, as all of this is running in Kubernetes. So once you understand what pods, deployment, services are, then we can actually dive into Istio and begin to create those together.
Awesome. All right, folks, we are over our normally allotted time, so let's wrap it up.
It's a lot to cover.
There is a lot to cover. So first, if folks wanted to get in touch with you, where can they find you on Twitter?
Let's. I can kick back. My Twitter handle and Joe's Twitter handles are up here. Definitely, we'd love to hear from you. And Yuri's is here too. You can bug him about I don't know, how to grow a nice beard or something.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. All right, folks on YouTube, on Meetup.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, Joe Cardenas and Anthony Bushong. Thank you so much for being with us today. Like, rate, subscribe, right? That's what you're supposed to say.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All the catchphrases.
There you go. And then, join our meetup on meetup.com/GCP online. Find us on YouTube. Obviously, you've done there at youtube.com/GCP live. And we'll be back next week, Thursday the 8th at 1 p.m. Pacific, with a session about managing your machine learning projects. Very, very different than what we talked about today, but really interesting as well. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great day and a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.